رب العالمين.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
العالمين يا رحمن يا رحيم.
Mia, and now let me just check with Shazia what's happening. Okay, we all good. Thank you, Shazia. You know, she just works magic and wonders. Whenever I start stressing, when technology just overwhelms me or something happens, we've got Shazia there. Mohammed's also jumping in the background. That, you know, Shazia works her magic around here. So I'm always calm, and I know when I've got Shazia there, everything's going to be okay. And now we're talking Youth Day. And I'm so pleased I have my next guest. I'm really excited to be speaking to my next guest. His name is Mariam Moodley. He's currently an entrepreneur in South Africa in the space of IT technologies, affirming skills development through the sector education training authorities. He serves as CEO of the Soft Start BTI in IT incubator in Gauteng, and a founding member of the Africa 2.0, a Pan-Africanist lobbyist organization. So that's what this Africa 2.0. He's politically involved with Azasam, Azesto, and Azapo. Navarone gains his political insights, and you know what? Who his parents are as well. He gets his political insights from his parents, Sam and Srini Moodley, founding members of the Black Conscious Movement. So I'm so pleased to speak to him, because I think growing up in that environment has had a positive influence and also shape who he is and his perceptions about life, about humanity, about equality, and everything comes from that household and the legacy that his parents has given him. So I want to welcome him, and also I'd like to take a few moments for him to actually pay tribute. Use today as June 16th to actually acknowledge his parents and pay tribute to his parents as well. So good afternoon and welcome to Salam Media, your humanitarian journalism portal, and thanks so much for your time.
Mariam, thank you so much for having us and affording us this opportunity to discuss a very prevalent issue in terms of equality of education, equality of family life, which is an imperative in our society today, because our framework of education, of no matter where we come from in the world, is based through, firstly, our families, and then more importantly, through our extended families, and that being the schooling structure and environment that is formed by society.
And, you know, I just find that's what my question today was: does June 16th have that much relevance to the youth of today? Do they still have that conviction and that activism to ensure that every learner has access to a quality, equal education? And when I say education, the same resources in our most resource schools in the affluent areas to the schools in the rural areas, because we know, I think that was highlighted now with the COVID pandemic. The schools were not ready because they were previously disadvantaged. The running water situation, the lack of hygiene facilities, ablution facilities, that was it was dated pre-COVID times, and hence that was the delay. Actually, it wasn't even the sanitizing issue, and that they were ill-equipped or under-resourced. So I just find somewhere along the line, I find being in that education space, our youth have gone a bit complacent. Am I correct or incorrect in terms of my perceptions?
Okay, so let's take a look at it. It's not the role and responsibility of just solely students or learners to facilitate the infrastructure question. It is a societal question. More importantly, in terms of activism, let's just backtrack a little to the aspect of activism and what we see, which I'm very proud of in our country specifically, and it's a global situation, which is fees must fall. If we look at, yes, firstly, number one, the media unfortunately has highlighted the violence that was perpetrated by the students during the time of fees must fall, and did not highlight the actual questions that were raised by the voices of students about the inequalities, and more importantly, a very imperative question, which is the localization of education, not a Western-based educational system. That has never been readdressed. And so you even find, however, globally, on the global side, the fact that we are now all global citizens doesn't mean that we're on the stage, that we are given our voices. The global question around fees must fall and that education must be free to all and an equal education. Now we're coming back to the main thrust of what you are talking about, which is being highlighted through COVID in terms of the inequalities of infrastructure. Okay, this sounds sort of political of what I'm about to say. Our government has done a fairly good job. Now, good job does not necessarily mean it is the best job. And so therefore, we find the inefficiencies that we see, for example, the lack of water in some instances, the toilets not being correct, or the environment not being protective to our most vulnerable, which are our youth. But the youth are standing up, and so the activism does exist, but we get too diffused. This is my word of today. Our society is diffused very easily by the systems that are in play, whether those political or whether they are non-political or whether they're capitalist-based. We are diffused very easily from our agendas that we need to fight for. But the spirit of activism still echoes in our society today, and we see that through Fees Must Fall. And that's a testament to 1976. It was the culmination of a time when there were 30 to 40 articles of legislation that oppressed the Black youth, culminating in the fact that the compulsory use of Afrikaans as a medium and language, the students stood up to say no. And we still see that voice and that spirit of protest and the seeking of truth and justice and equality for all is still seen in some format. It might not be as loud, though it gets a little violent, not to many of us that are in the middle class and upper class liking, but their voice is expressed. But we get diffused too quickly.
I like this word. I hope there's no copyright on it. So I will be using this word as well. You might, there might be a copyright. I'm known for keeping new concepts and terminologies in my arsenal of words here and phrases in that. So I'm definitely going to coach you on this here. But I like what you said, and you encapsulated this diffusion. And I think also social media has played a role in terms of us getting diffused in that. But as you say, the spirit of activism is still there, and we need to harness this. In whichever government of the day is there, we need to make sure our leaders that we've placed in positions of power ensure that we have this right to an accessible, equal education with equal resources across the board. And I think that activism should continue.
Let's just not also disrespect the private sector. I am a proponent of ensuring that private sector education must not exist in society, because the moment we privatize education, privatization has its place in the economic framework and has an imperative action to enable economies. But however, privatizing education, when we have an argument of free education equal, there's a discord in regards to how that is positioned. So for me, we need to also hear that the private sector education children themselves are also crying out towards the racism. weirdly that it's been called because of George Floyd and the issues of racism and inequalities in America and the death that is perpetrated by systems of America. But in South Africa, the knock-on effect has been to all of us in all levels of society. And here we find that private sector education children are crying out through social media that there's racism that is happening in their society. And what's actually happening is that you find that, again, a diffusion by the systematic processes. And that's why what was interesting on the Trevor Noah show the other day, the redefinition of racism is to include systematic and system racism or inequalities of behavior to different people within society. And the one thing that
I'd like
seems
to engage you on, sorry, this conversation I want to continue. You know, education is close to my heart. I'm passionate. I mean, that's how I came to be. Is my program was Educational Insights, where we used to discuss and highlight these issues and raise awareness. So this subject, we're not over. I don't have time today. I want to focus specifically on Youth Day, but
yes.
Definitely now that I've got you, this needs a broader discussion, a wider discussion, and a lot more time, because there's a lot to unpack on what you've said, and I think we've just touched the surface or scratched the surface.
True.
But I just want to go back now, because, you know, for me, Youth Day is also a day of commemorating and acknowledging everybody who gave their lives, because basically you gave your life for this activism and to ensure that we have this quality, equal education and accessible education. And two of those activists are somebody dear to you and near to you. That is your beloved parents. And I mean, they gave their life for this activism. So just tell us briefly a little bit of your parents. I'd like to acknowledge them, and also a bit of the history and their struggles in this direction.
Okay, so let's start. Everybody affirms the male position, and I want to affirm the role of women and the power of women.
Thank you.
And as much as I might look like and sound like my father from a physiological standpoint, in actual fact, most of my ideologies are constructed because of my mother. And if it wasn't for her passion, her search for the truth, the search for equality that was enabled through her home environment. So my mom was born in Dundee in 1948 and came from a relatively conservative family, but that conservative family still gave her the nurturings of seeing truth and justice and equality. And she then expressed it when she got to the Bluff University, or what is now called UDW. And she found herself in a community of like-minded people, and one of them obviously being my father. And through theater and art and history, my mother expressed her understandings of what we should be. And so she found that by using and finding and formulating the word and the organization, Black Consciousness, she rose her awareness to a broader level of not just herself as a powerful woman, but as a person in this world, and found her voice stronger. And take it from me, that voice has not been quieted. She's one of the most formidable personalities with regards to fighting for or seeking out injustice to ensure that no society should in any shape or form be oppressed. So my mother's history is a phenomenal one as a woman, and an active agent of change. So parts of her history, she then became a teacher, and in doing so, she was then, during a banning order, was forced out of the teaching profession for a short period of time, and then found herself throughout her remaining years in the teaching profession with those of disability. And she has been a proponent of equality for disabled people, to make sure that there is equality for them as well. And so it has no racial connotation. Humanity is the format and the baseline of what we all are. We might have different characteristics, we might have different belief systems, but the one fundamental that my mother will always say is that humanity is first, and being human is first. So the fight through the Black consciousness is the inequality between the so-called definitions of white and Black, and she addressed those issues. My father found a more broader scope, being at one point the spokesperson for AZAPO, and worked through various facets of the Black consciousness movement, and was always a figurehead, and a leader. So he took the stage, the frontline stage, where the most positive and powerful things happened in the background, which my mother was a contributor towards.
And what was some of your early memories in terms of, I'm sure your home must have been a hive of activity, and also a meeting place of all sorts, and a planning place, a place of strategy, and just a hub. You know, you run this incubator hubs. Your home must have been a hub of change.
Yes, it definitely was. So let's just talk about something. So I've been part of, on the sideline, the creation of a small group called the Children of Consciousness. And I shared a story with one of my fellow children, is that I was one of the children that, or might have been the only child, present at the SASO trialists. So this is up here in Pretoria, and I sat on the shoulders of all 9 trialists. And yes, our home was definitely a buzz with people coming in and out, but more predominantly in the very earlier years, because my mother was under banning order. The special branch was, I think, more of a visitor at our door than activists. But lots of activists, young people, were trained, groomed by my mom during her banning order. People that she engaged with in their youth were people like Jay Naidu, and other leaders. We also had, but we were constantly watched and monitored by the special branch at the time. So how we had to facilitate or meander through this physical lockdown that we had back in the 1970s because of apartheid rather than a pandemic. Yes, apartheid was a pandemic, social pandemic itself, but the activities that my mother was involved in, and this comes to something that was so powerful that I grew up with, of what my mother created, was she created street theater. Because we grew up in the flats of Overport in Durban, she galvanized all the children around her, creating these little Eisteddfords on the street. And each flat, all the children got together and produced their own little plays and poems. And through that, activism was found. And it wasn't political, it was pure enjoyment of the arts, pure expression of self, identification of self, which, if you understand, is the premise and one of the great pillars of the Black consciousness movement, is who you are. They're answering that question. And through theater and street theater and galvanizing community programs, my mother was able to foster and nurture this in and amongst a lot of the children in our area. And so, yes, besides, I can tell you many other anecdotal stories with regards to, but I'd leave that for either a memoir or another platform. But yes,
I think you should write a memoir, definitely a memoir, because these stories here, if we're not going to collect them, it's a legacy, and we need to really collect them or collate them. So even if it's not in a book form, but a memoir in terms of podcast or something like that, that people could hear, audio visual memoir, or via audio memoir, but some sort of platform in terms of where we can just keep it like how we keep our memory boxes in that. And
Correct.
two things what you said in terms of, I like how you coined the term that, like you say, yes, many people lived in a social lockdown, and
Mhm.
apartheid was one of the biggest social lockdowns, and it was the social pandemic of our time that you were locked there. And you encapsulated that so much. But what, in all that you were speaking now, for me, your mother is a maternal figure, a nurturer, because what she did is, instead of that anger and that hatred that comes with somebody being socially confined in lockdown, as you say, in a social pandemic, she used escape. She used an avenue to escape that, to transcend you, to take you to another level where you can essentially feel human again and express
Correct.
yourself and find out who you are. So you don't grow up being this very angry human being, filled with all negative emotions, but rather you value yourself. You value yourself as a human being, and in doing so, you value others, and you see the humanness in this through what she did. So for me, what she did was something very, very profound in terms of, you can see the educator in her in terms of
Yes.
developing you. And maybe you didn't see it at that
Oh,
time, but that's what she did, not only for you, but for all your children. So that's why today from speaking to you, I see you, although there are these issues, you still maintain your sense of humor. You're able to laugh at the lighter side of life, and appreciate life in its totality, because of that seed she gave you, and she nurtured you. Not only you, but I think the community children were her children, and
yes.
society was her children. And through, you could see, when you were relaying the story, I could just see that passionate educator in her, because she used the situation and she transcended it. And that's who I am. I always say, even today it's partly cold and it's raining, and
Mhm.
the lemonade person in me said, you know what, I can make a hot lemon drink, and the rain is actually good. The Val Dam is at 40% low, so this is the reprieve. The Highveld is very, very dry through the pressure
True.
systems in winter, and now we're getting beautiful moisture in the atmosphere. So at least our
Well,
sinus passages can be moistured. So there
and
you go.
that's the crazy thing. I mean, is COVID good or is COVID bad? I mean, taking it to another level, um, where the healing process of the earth is seen. The fact that the human movement has been isolated, uh, it actually has healed the earth. We're seeing the largest sardine run in Durban at the moment, so that's a wonderful thing that's happening, and other healing elements that the earth requires, and we need to be supportive of that as well in terms of the place and space that we live in, just the physicality of it, not necessarily being based on a capitalist framework, but also nature and nurture needs to go hand in hand. And how do we sustain ourselves as human beings? And how do we see ourselves going forward? This moment affords us the time to reflect, understands who we are as South Africans, how do we contribute to each other and the humanity of it. And all of it is based on the fundamental principles of education. How do we educate? How do we find ourselves? And how do we see ourselves? And yes, my mother in my world is definitely my hero, and will always be. So, in terms of that, again, Mother Nature, the nurturing processes of our lives is an imperative.
I I definitely enjoyed this conversation, and I love the direction it took, because, like I said, I'm always the one that looks for silver linings in any situation. So even though we know there are issues in our education system that can get right, there's so much positivity. And I think, as South Africans, we have the sense of goodwill and the sense of compassion. And yes, there's lots of kindness and compassion still left in this world, in South Africa as well. And it came through as well in COVID-19 pandemic. We reached out to people we didn't know. We reached out to strangers. We helped and lend a helping hand. I mean, even at Salam Foundation, we even handed out masks to JMPD, and that's like irony. And they, yeah, Azhar, our director, went one day and they didn't have masks. And they were all there on the side of the road, and he stopped. And I mean, they were looking at him, and he said, "I'm from Salam Foundation, and we're raising funds for PPE. And we noticed you don't have." And this was in the earlier days of this. And he gave, and I mean, they were so thankful. And I mean, that was like, just uncanny that it happened, but it happened, and bonds were formed. And I'm so glad you've seen the lighter side of it. But I mean, that's the nature.
No, I mean,
I'm
I
always looking at silver linings.
I understand the position. I mean, in terms of from a policing nature, for us to those of us that come from fairly revolutionary backgrounds, our inability to cross that line, to afford humanity to an oppressor or people who enforce laws that are either discriminatory or not. So yes, just the act of giving face masks to the police. Yes, I'm finding that firstly quite amusing, but the wholeness of it, it just shows our humanity, that we are really human. And the 1976 Soweto uprising and June 16th and Youth Day, that's what they represented. The cry was not a cry just solely against the oppression regime, but it called for the unification of all of us. And that's what parts of our society don't know, is that they called on all of us to become one and to see ourselves as human. And that's as forgiving and just the giving nature of human beings, what we are, naturally to give. And that's what that cry also amplified. It amplified the 1976 June 16th, amplified a call for unity, call for equality, call for humanness, rather than what it's been tick-boxed into being. Oh, if you have to look at June 16th, no, it was against Afrikaans. Then South Africa then went an anti-Afrikaans line. And people don't seem to understand that Afrikaans is an African language. That's something people need to also amplify. And so for many years, a lot of us in South Africa, part of the the liberation movement, we were anti-Afrikaans. And a lot of sentiment still resides within society not to see that Afrikaans is an African language. So just by its name itself, Afrikaans is African.
Dankie, meneer Moodley. Dankie, meneer Moodley. Jy's van Durban, so ek weet nie as jy verstaan Afrikaans of jy verstaan nie Afrikaans, maar dankie. 'n bietjie Afrikaans. Okay, thanks so much for that. And I loved how you just rounded off and summarized the whole essence of the June 16 day and what it means, the essence of it. And thank you for joining us and giving us your time here on Salam Media. And that's everything you said. And please, everything, in fact, your mom works for, that is the vision at Salam Media, humanitarian online portal, is we want to bring the human stories of people, just to highlight their struggles, their strives, their successes, ordinary people who inspire us to do good and to become better versions of ourselves. So that is basically the vision of Salam Media. So I'm so pleased you joined us on this platform today on June 16th. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And take care. And we will, please, we need you again, because there's many things we need to highlight, or they say chew the fat about. So we need to chew some fat on many, many topics, you and I. So I will get my producer to contact you for a future show, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Anytime.
Thank you. And I've got a Facebook message from Mamulefe, and she says, get hold of the book, Time to Remember, a compilation by Sam Moodley with contributions from 29 other women activists, part of our untold stories. So please, if you can get hold of that book, I'm certainly going to try if I can get hold of the book, Time to Remember. and probably we can just discuss it. Maybe let's see if we can get hold of the author, Sam Moodley, one of the contributors of the book. I think we're going to contact Mama Lofi, a good friend and a colleague of our. So I'm going to chat to her, and maybe we can speak to one of the activists who contributed to the compilation.
Here's the book right here.
And oh, I've got there's the book on Facebook Live. We have this. I love live radio because things just happen and it's organic, and we get, that's the book, Reflections of Woman, from the Blank Conscious Movement. And I'm going to definitely try and get hold of a copy of the book, and then maybe check to you or Mamu Lefi to see if we can get one of the contributors of the book to speak to us.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks so much for that.
Pleasure.
Much appreciated.
Thank you. Take care.
Pleasure. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be Kamisa of the living room. So let's take a short break and we'll be back.